Hey guys, this is Dave, and I have another Meze headphone in for a review. This is the 105 Air, or AER, and this set has been out for a little while, I think around 6 months or so I am a little behind the curve on this one. But because I've had it for so long, I've been able to spend a lot of time with it, pairing it with lots of different sources, and again, doing some comparisons as well. And I have to say, in terms of just its price to performance and where I feel the 105 Air stands in terms of its overall value, while there might be a couple of little things that I feel maybe could have used a little tweaking or improvement, honestly, in terms of its general just sound presentation and even its technical performance for the $400 asking price, I have to say, I think Meze did an excellent job with the 105 Air. And if you've watched my reviews, you know I talk about the importance of making a strong connection with the music. And for me, some sets do it and some simply don't, especially in this price range as far as full-size headphones. And while my connection with this headphone wasn't necessarily something that happened like right away or immediately, after spending a lot of time listening to it over time, I was able to establish a pretty strong connection with the 105 Air and with my music. So I will talk a little bit about that, but first, as usual, we'll go over the contents of the box, talk about the specifications, the design, then we'll get into sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that you get in the box. You get the headphones, the cable. It also comes with this hard case. And then there's a little small pouch that you can store the cable in. The cable quality is okay. I guess it does feel maybe a little bit thin for this price point, but I do still think it's perfectly acceptable. And that's one of those little things I was talking about in the opening. But I guess really that is a nitpick at this price point, because otherwise the cable is manageable and it's working perfectly fine for me. Now, the build quality of the headphones themselves is pretty much on par with what I've come to expect from Meze, and the build quality isn't just good for $400. This is comparable to some higher priced sets in my opinion, but the coolest part to me is the aesthetic, this all black aesthetic. It's just really sleek looking in my opinion, plus it's also very light and extremely comfortable. The headband is similar to the 99 Classic and 109 Pro in that it has that same type of spring steel headband, and that's combined with the padding over the elastic band. Now, the ear cups themselves are made out of plastic, so they're not wood or metal, but honestly, I don't feel like that necessarily takes away from the overall quality of the 105 AER. The pads are removable and replaceable, which is really good. It has a 50mm driver, and it is really easy to drive. It has a sensitivity of 112 dBs and then a 42 ohm impedance. So you should be able to drive this to high volume levels, again, easily with almost anything. And I will talk more about that in the sound segment. But in terms of just its overall build quality, the design, comfort, it checks all of the boxes, again, which I have come to expect nothing less from Meze. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to sound. Okay, let's quickly talk about drivability and pairing. So as I said, it does not require much in terms of power output to achieve loud volume levels. I was able to drive the 105 Air very easily with my dongles like the M18i, the M15i, and several others, which basically means if you want to listen to these on the go, you're perfectly fine just taking a dongle. But as far as the 105 Air's sound presentation, to me, I would say it basically falls within the range of what I would consider to be neutral. However, I do think that its bass energy is on the higher side of neutral. And most of that bass energy seems to be centered or focused around the mid bass, which of course basically translates into vocals and some instruments having a little more of a warm presentation. So I guess you could say this has a neutral, warm kind of signature, but breaking things down a little further, starting with the bass. Although the bass presentation is mid-bass focused, it does still have really good bass extension. So even though the emphasis is going to be focused a little more on kick impact and is going to add maybe a little more weight to instruments and vocals, I don't ever really get the sense that there's any significant roll off. I still feel like there's plenty of sub bass energy if the track calls for it. So you do get that nice mid bass punch and impact, but then you also have the sub bass frequencies still creating a nice foundation and supporting the rest of the bass frequencies. Now, again, I should reiterate that I don't know if I would say that this is technically, in my opinion, north of neutral, but I would still consider this to have maybe a little bit of a bass boost. And it is certainly what I would consider to be on the higher side of neutral. And if there was any more, then I might say it's north of neutral. And then as you move into the lower mid-range, I do feel like despite that small amount of warmth, Meze did do an excellent job of keeping things very clean in the lower mid-range, which is important because the Air is able to render vocals and instruments that land down in that lower mid-range area with really good clarity for this price point and without introducing any bass bleed or congestion. So lower male vocals, cellos, or again, anything that lands there that has texture and requires a controlled transition out of the bass and the mids, the Air will provide that control. And that control and that clarity really carries all the way through the mid-range. And in addition, there aren't any weird dips, there's no weird peaks in the mid-range that could introduce excessive coloration until you get to, I think it's about 2K, because you actually do have just a little bit of a recession around the 1.5 to 2K area. And I don't know if I would say that it thins out some vocals, but I do definitely feel like it maybe can push them back a little bit, I guess, but it doesn't introduce any unnaturalness, at least to my ear. So the mid-range generally does stay pretty linear, and what that does is that results in vocals and instruments being rendered naturally for the most part, plus you have good mid-range detail and texture. But bottom line though is that in my opinion, the overall bass and mid-range presentation is really, really impressive for this price point. That said, now the treble is where I did notice maybe some things that could, depending on your personal taste, could potentially push this maybe outside of your sound preference. But I don't think it should keep you from buying this, in my opinion, because it's certainly not, I don't think it's a deal breaker, especially considering how much this gets right for the price. But it is still something I noticed. And what I noticed is that there was maybe just a little too much energy between, I think, around 4 and 6K. And I don't know if I would call it overly bright, but it is maybe a little bit bright. And despite that, it still sounds really good. And everything, again, it all sounds natural. However, I did notice that drum strikes or percussive attack maybe seemed to be a little more emphasized. Now, my buddy said he didn't like the way it affected some vocals and even described it as maybe edging towards sounding a tad unnatural, but that was not my experience. For me, I did notice that it maybe added a little bit of an edge to vocals and maybe some other instruments that landed there, but I didn't really hear anything that I would consider to sound unnatural. But I guess if he perceived it as sounding a little unnatural, then I guess that is a possibility for you. It could be a little different for everyone. Now, in terms of technical performance, overall for this price point, I would say its imaging is above average. So the positional cues for instruments are very accurate. They're quite focused, plus it also gives you a really good sense of separation and airiness. Although I don't know if I would say its soundstage is necessarily all that wide. It is certainly wide enough for me. I would just say, I guess maybe really honestly at this price point, I would say the soundstage width is maybe just about average. And as far as detail levels, they are also good, not amazing, but definitely sufficient and certainly adequate for this price point. Now, as far as comparisons, I did get a chance to compare this directly with the HD6XX, and I do feel like the 6XX compared with the 105 Air is a little too light in the bass department for me. However, I do like the approach that Sennheiser took with the tuning of the upper mids of the 6XX a little better. And it is, I guess, a more mid-centric headphone, but if I'm being totally honest, I don't know that I really necessarily like the 6XX overall more than the 105 Air. And I might give the HD6XX maybe a slight technical edge, but in terms of just tuning and pure listening enjoyment, I think I could be happy with either one. I could be just as happy with the 105 Air as I could be with the HD6XX. But that, and I like the HD6XX a lot, but that's how much I like the 105 Air. Now, as far as how Meze priced this in reference to the 109 Pro and the 99 Classics, right in between the two, I think they pretty much nailed it, because I think the general performance increase with the 105 Air over the 99 Classics is easily enough to justify the additional cost. And to me, this is an upgrade in both tuning and technical performance over the 99 Classics. And I feel the same way about the 109 Pro. I do feel like there is a performance increase with the 109 Pro over the 105 Air. However, honestly, I don't think it's a very big jump up from the 105 Air. And it's not because I don't think the 109 Pro is good for its price. I do. The 109 Pro is a great headphone for its price, even in today's market, if you saw my review. I just think the 105 Air is a very, very good headphone for this $400 price range. Although again, I do know a few people who might disagree. And I know neutral warm, or at least this particular flavor of neutral warm, may not be for everyone, but for me personally, I think this is a really, really great set for $400. Okay, I think that covers everything. If you are new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please comment on this video, please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.